the meeting that never happened. In our timeline, Apple Computer was incorporated on January 3rd, 1977. But the real genesis happened months earlier, in the summer of 1976, when Mike Markkula, a retired Intel marketing manager with $250,000 to invest, met with Jobs and Wozniak in that now legendary garage. Markkula saw something the rest of Silicon Valley missed. While other investors saw two hippies with a hobbyist's toy, Markkula saw a philosophical revolution. He didn't invest in a computer. He invested in the idea that computers could be for everyone. The meeting almost didn't happen. Markkula was actually on his way to a different startup pitch that morning, a semiconductor firm with impressive technical specifications and a buttoned-up team. His wife, Linda, was the one who mentioned she'd heard about those kids with the computer from a neighbor. Maybe stop by, she suggested. It's on the way. That casual suggestion changed everything. But what if Linda Markkula had been tired that morning? What if she hadn't made that offhand comment? What if Mike had gone straight to the semiconductor pitch, been impressed, and written his check there instead? In our alternate timeline, that's exactly what happens. Mike Markkula invests his $250,000 in the semiconductor firm. It's a solid investment. The company goes public in 1982, and Markkula doubles his money. A good outcome, by any measure. Meanwhile, back in Los Altos, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak sell a few dozen Apple I computers to hobbyists through the Homebrew Computer Club. They make enough to fund the development of the Apple II, but without Markkula's business acumen and capital, they can't scale production. By 1978, they've sold maybe 500 units total. Impressive for a garage operation, but nowhere near the numbers needed to transform an industry. Commodore and Tandy dominate the nascent personal computer market instead. Their machines are technically competent, but designed by engineers for engineers. Beige boxes with cryptic command lines, thick manuals written in impenetrable jargon. These aren't consumer products. They're tools for the technically initiated. Jobs, frustrated by the slow growth and lack of capital, takes a job at Atari full-time in 1979. Wozniak continues to tinker, but eventually returns to UC Berkeley to finish his degree. The Apple partnership dissolves amicably. They remain friends. Sometimes they wonder what might have been. But here's what they don't realize. It wasn't just a company that died in that moment. It was an entire philosophy of human-computer interaction. A philosophy that said technology should adapt to people, not the other way around. The decade of beige boxes. Let's trace what happens in the computer industry without Apple's influence. Throughout the 1980s, personal computers spread, but slowly and to a much narrower demographic. IBM releases its PC in 1981, just as in our timeline, but without Apple's competition pushing design and user experience, the IBM PC becomes even more utilitarian. It's a business machine, period. The advertising doesn't feature ordinary families. It features accountants and engineers. Microsoft still rises. Bill Gates is brilliant at business strategy regardless of Apple's existence. But without the pressure of competing with the Macintosh interface, Windows development follows a different trajectory. The graphical user interface exists. Xerox PARC still invented it in the 1970s, but without Jobs stealing it. Yes, that's what he did, though he'd call it inspired borrowing. Nobody makes it elegant. Nobody makes it intuitive. Windows 1.0 ships in 1985, but it's clunky, unstable, and requires significant technical knowledge to use effectively. Most business users stick with DOS command lines well into the 1990s because, frankly, the graphical alternative isn't compelling enough to justify the learning curve. What they didn't account for was waiting in Cupertino, or rather, what wasn't waiting there. In our reality, the Macintosh launched in 1984 with a revolutionary promise, a computer anyone could use without reading a manual. That Super Bowl commercial showing a woman hurling a sledgehammer at Big Brother, in this timeline, it never airs. The sledgehammer stays on the shelf. Conformity wins. By 1990, the personal computer market has bifurcated into two clear categories: business machines and hobby machines. Business computers run DOS or primitive Windows interfaces and exist exclusively in office environments. Hobby computers are for the technically inclined, teenagers who love to code, adult enthusiasts who read thick technical magazines, engineers who bring their work home. There's no crossover, no mainstream adoption. The idea that your grandmother would use a computer, laughable. The suggestion that artists would choose computers over traditional media, absurd. The creative industries remain analog through the entire decade. Graphic designers use X-Acto knives and wax, musicians record on tape, filmmakers edit on Steam Deck machines. Desktop publishing never becomes a thing because there's no desktop that's publishable. Adobe exists, but it's a niche software company serving professional print houses, not creatives working from home. The Internet for insiders. By 1995, the technology landscape looks radically different. Personal computers exist, but they're primarily found in offices, not homes. Home computer ownership in the United States hovers around 15%, compared to over 30% in our timeline. The machines are cheaper here, technically speaking, because without Apple driving premium design, the race to the bottom on price happens faster. But cheaper doesn't mean more accessible. Families who do buy computers discovered they've purchased expensive typewriters and calculators that require their teenager, usually a son because the gender gap in tech is even wider here, to become the household IT department. Mom and dad don't touch the thing. It's too complicated, too hostile, too clearly not designed for them. The internet arrives in the mid-1990s, but its adoption curve is gentler. Without Apple's design philosophy influencing the broader industry, early web browsers are even more primitive. Netscape Navigator still launches, but it's more technical, less intuitive. The World Wide Web remains primarily the domain of academics, technologists, and hobbyists through 1998. There's no iMac in 1998 to make the internet feel friendly and approachable. No candy-colored machine that says technology can be fun. Instead, beige boxes continue to multiply, each one essentially identical, each one requiring technical knowledge to set up and maintain. Steve Jobs in this timeline is a middle manager at Atari, then later a consultant for various Silicon Valley firms. He's known as that guy with the intense personality, but not as a visionary. He pushes for better design, for user-centered thinking, but without the platform of his own company, his influence is limited. He's the voice in the meeting that people politely ignore. The dot-com boom still happens, but it's smaller, more concentrated. Amazon exists, but it grows more slowly because fewer people shop online. eBay exists, but it's truly a hobbyist platform. The general public doesn't trust putting their credit card information into a computer. Google still emerges as the dominant search engine, but it serves a much smaller user base. The internet in the year 2000 has perhaps 200 million users globally, compared to over 400 million in our timeline. Three men saw this divergence coming. Engineers at Xerox PARC who watched Jobs tour their facility in 1979 in our reality. In this timeline, Jobs never makes that visit. Those engineers know they've built something revolutionary, a graphical interface that could change computing forever. But they work for a photocopy company, and Xerox management can't see the vision. The technology sits in a research lab, impressive and inert. The mobile revolution that wasn't. Now we arrive at the turn of the millennium, and this is where the divergence becomes genuinely profound. This is exactly the kind of historical crossroads we explore on Paths Not Taken. The moment where a missing piece doesn't just change one industry, but reshapes how billions of people interact with reality itself. In our timeline, the iPhone launched in June 2007, and within a decade, smartphones had become humanity's primary interface with digital information. But that revolution required a specific set of conditions, a specific philosophy, and a company willing to bet everything on the idea that people wanted computers in their pockets. Not smaller laptops, but entirely new devices designed around touch, simplicity, and intuition. Without Apple, that revolution unfolds very differently. Or rather, it doesn't unfold at all. Not really. Mobile phones still evolve, of course. By 2000, Nokia dominates the global market with devices that make calls, send text messages, and maybe play Snake if you're feeling adventurous. BlackBerry emerges as the business standard with its physical keyboard and email capability. These are communication tools, not computers. Nobody's checking the web on them beyond simple text-based WAP pages that load slowly and display poorly. Palm Pilots exist for the truly dedicated, professionals who carry both a phone and a separate PDA. But these devices require a stylus, have monochrome screens, and sync to your computer through a physical cable. They're productivity tools for a specific demographic: business travelers, salespeople, doctors. Not everyday objects for everyday people. The critical insight that Apple brought to mobile computing, that the interface should be your finger, that apps should be beautiful and intuitive, that a phone could be a camera and music player and web browser all in one elegant package, that insight never materializes. Instead, the mobile industry continues its incremental evolution. Phones get smaller, then slightly bigger. They add cameras, but the photos are terrible. They add music playback, but it's clunky. They add web browsing, but it's painful. By 2010, the dominant mobile device is the BlackBerry Bold, a competent email machine with a full physical keyboard. Teenagers still use flip phones for texting. Mobile web usage accounts for less than 5% of total internet traffic because nobody wants to browse on a tiny screen with a D-pad controller. The idea of mobile first never emerges because mobile is clearly second or third or fourth. The fractured digital landscape. Let's examine what the world looks like in 2015 without the smartphone revolution. The most striking difference is fragmentation. In our reality, the smartphone became a universal device, one object that replaced cameras, music players, GPS units, handheld game consoles, e-readers, voice recorders, and countless other single-purpose gadgets. It unified our digital lives. In this timeline, that unification never happens. People still carry cameras, dedicated point-and-shoot devices from Canon and Nikon. Music players are still separate products. The iPod exists, launched by a different company, but it's just a music player, nothing more. GPS units from Garmin and TomTom sit in car dashboards. E-readers from Amazon and Sony serve book lovers. Each device requires its own charger, its own software, its own ecosystem. The average person who wants to be digitally connected carries 3 to 5 devices. It's cumbersome, expensive, and deeply frustrating. There's no integration. Your photos don't sync to anything. You have to physically connect your camera to your computer with a cable. Your music collection lives on your MP3 player and nowhere else. Your navigation device knows where you're going, but can't tell you if there's traffic because it doesn't have internet connectivity. Social media develops, but it remains primarily desktop-bound. Facebook exists and is popular, but without the mobile revolution, it doesn't become the omnipresent force it is in our timeline. People check it when they sit down at their computers, maybe once in the morning, once in the evening. Instagram never launches because without smartphone cameras and instant sharing, the concept doesn't make sense. Twitter exists but remains niche, a platform for tech enthusiasts and journalists, not a global conversation. The app economy never materializes. There's no app store because there's no unified platform to build for. Software remains what it was: programs you buy in boxes or download from websites, designed for desktop operating systems, distributed through traditional retail or download channels. Independent developers can't easily reach consumers. The democratization of software creation that Apple enabled, where a teenager in Bangladesh can build an app and distribute it to billions of users, never happens. The creative dark age. Perhaps the most profound loss in this timeline is what happens to creative industries. In our reality, Apple's tools democratize creativity. Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, GarageBand, iMovie, these applications combined with increasingly powerful consumer hardware meant that anyone with vision and dedication could produce professional quality work. A teenager in their bedroom could produce a hit song. A film student could edit a feature on their laptop. A graphic designer could launch a freelance career with nothing but a computer and talent. The barriers to entry collapsed, and creativity flourished in unexpected places. In this timeline, those barriers remain standing. Professional creative tools are expensive, complex, and require specialized hardware. Music production still happens primarily in studios with tens of thousands of dollars in equipment. Film editing requires dedicated workstations and expensive software suites. Graphic design remains the domain of professionals with formal training and access to high-end systems. The result is a creative landscape that's more hierarchical, more gatekept, more limited in its voices. Independent music exists, but struggles to reach audiences without the distribution platforms that smartphone app stores enabled. Independent film remains truly independent, screened at festivals, maybe picked up for limited distribution, but rarely breaking through to mainstream awareness. YouTube exists in this timeline, but it's different. Without smartphones putting cameras in everyone's pockets, without the ease of filming and uploading from a single device, YouTube is dominated by professional or semi-professional content creators who have the equipment and technical knowledge to produce and upload videos. The raw, authentic, anyone can be a creator culture never fully develops. YouTube in 2015 looks more like traditional media: higher production values, fewer voices, less diversity of content. Podcasting exists, but remains niche. Without the smartphone revolution, making audio content easily accessible anywhere, podcasts are something people listen to at their desks while working, not during commutes or while exercising. The medium never explodes into the cultural force it became in our timeline. The streaming revolution arrives late and incomplete. Netflix exists, but focuses primarily on mailing DVDs and desktop streaming. Without mobile devices driving consumption patterns, people still watch content primarily on televisions and computer monitors. The idea of watching a show on your phone during your commute? Impossible here. The screen is too small, the data costs too high, the interface too clunky. The social fabric rewoven. But perhaps we shouldn't be too quick to mourn this timeline, because without smartphones, some things are genuinely better. Human connection, for instance. In this world, dinner tables aren't battlegrounds where parents fight to keep phones out of sight. Concerts are experienced without a sea of glowing screens blocking the view. Conversations happen without the constant interruption of notifications. People are present in a way that our timeline has largely forgotten. The attention economy never fully materializes. Without smartphones delivering infinite content and constant dopamine hits, human attention spans don't fragment the way they have in our reality. People still read long-form content. Books remain popular. Magazines and newspapers adapt to the digital age, but don't face the existential crisis that smartphone-driven news consumption created. Mental health patterns look different. The anxiety and depression epidemics that correlate with smartphone adoption in our timeline, particularly among teenage girls, aren't comparing themselves to filtered Instagram influencers because Instagram doesn't exist. Social comparison still happens, but it's localized, grounded in physical communities rather than global digital networks. Privacy remains more robust. Without powerful tracking devices in everyone's pockets, surveillance capitalism develops more slowly and less pervasively. Advertising is less targeted, less invasive, less creepily aware of your every move and interest. Data breaches happen, but they're smaller, less consequential, because less data is being collected in the first place. The gig economy develops differently. Without smartphone apps connecting workers to jobs in real time, services like Uber and Lyft never launch. Taxi services remain traditional, dispatched by phone, regulated by medallion systems, operating on known models. Food delivery exists, but is limited to restaurants with their own delivery staff. The precarious app-based work that defines employment for millions in our timeline doesn't exist here. Is this better? In some ways, undeniably. But the cost is access, opportunity, and connection on a global scale. The developing world disconnected. Here's where the absence of Apple's philosophy creates perhaps its most significant divergence: global inequality. In our timeline, the smartphone revolution transformed the developing world. Suddenly, people in rural India, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, places where desktop computers were rare and internet infrastructure was limited, had access to powerful computing and internet connectivity through mobile devices. The smartphone leapfrogged traditional development patterns. A farmer in Kenya could use M-Pesa for mobile banking without ever owning a computer. A student in rural China could access educational content through smartphone apps. An entrepreneur in Nigeria could build a business using mobile-first platforms. The smartphone became the great equalizer, not perfectly, but significantly. In this timeline, that leapfrog never happens. Without a device designed to be intuitive, affordable, and universally accessible, the digital divide remains a chasm. Desktop computers and traditional internet access require infrastructure, electricity, physical connections, space, and money. These requirements exclude billions. By 2020, internet penetration in developing nations lags years behind our timeline. The global conversation remains dominated by voices from wealthy nations. Economic opportunities stay concentrated in regions with traditional infrastructure. The democratizing potential of digital technology, flawed and incomplete as it was in our reality, never materializes here. Education remains more traditional and less accessible. In our timeline, smartphones put educational resources into the hands of anyone with connectivity. Khan Academy, Coursera tutorials, these became paths to knowledge for people who couldn't access traditional educational institutions. In this timeline, education remains more gate-kept, more dependent on physical presence and institutional access. The Arab Spring, as we knew it, doesn't happen. Without smartphones and social media enabling rapid coordination and information sharing, the uprisings of 2011 either don't occur or unfold very differently. Authoritarian regimes find it easier to control information when citizens aren't carrying cameras and communication devices everywhere they go. This cuts both ways, of course. Misinformation spreads more slowly. Extremist groups have fewer tools for recruitment. But the trade-off is that truth also spreads more slowly, and organization against oppression is more difficult. The technological stagnation. By 2025, the technology industry in this timeline looks remarkably different from our own. Without Apple pushing the boundaries of what computing could be, the entire sector evolved more conservatively. Microsoft remains dominant, but it's a less innovative Microsoft. Without the existential threat that iOS and the iPhone posed, Windows evolves incrementally. By 2025, it looks like a more polished version of Windows 7. Stable, functional, and uninspiring. The radical rethinking that touch interfaces demanded never happens. Google exists and dominates search, but it's primarily an advertising and search company. Without the smartphone market pushing it into hardware and operating systems, Android either doesn't exist or exists as a minor Linux-based OS for enthusiasts. Google's ambitions remain digital and ad-focused, rather than expanding into the physical realm of devices. Facebook remains the dominant social network, but never achieves the ubiquity it did in our timeline. Without mobile access making it a constant presence, it's a website people visit rather than a reality they inhabit. Mark Zuckerberg is wealthy, but not one of the world's richest people. The company never acquires Instagram or WhatsApp because neither exists. Amazon grows, but more slowly. Without smartphones driving mobile shopping and Prime's rapid delivery meeting instant gratification habits, Amazon remains primarily an online bookstore that expanded into general retail. It's successful, but it hasn't fundamentally transformed retail the way it did in our timeline. Physical stores remain more viable. Malls still exist. The retail apocalypse is postponed or avoided. The technology giants of our era, the companies worth trillions that shape global policy and culture, are smaller, less powerful, less omnipresent in this timeline. Technology is important, but it hasn't consumed everything the way it has in our reality. Innovation continues, but it's more incremental, more conservative, more focused on efficiency gains rather than paradigm shifts. Virtual reality exists, but remains a niche hobbyist pursuit. Expensive headsets for gaming enthusiasts, not a platform that anyone seriously believes will be the next computing paradigm. Artificial intelligence advances, but more slowly, without the massive mobile data sets and cloud computing infrastructure that accelerated machine learning in our timeline. The question becomes, is this stagnation or is it stability? The present that never became. So here we are in 2025, in a world that never learned to touch. Let's walk through an ordinary day in this timeline and contrast it with our own. You wake up to a traditional alarm clock. The smartphone alarm never became universal, so standalone alarm clocks remain common. You get ready for work in silence, or maybe with a radio playing. There's no checking your phone because there is no phone to check, beyond a flip phone that makes calls and texts. Your commute is different. The train or bus is quieter. People read newspapers, paperback books, or simply stare out the window. There's no endless scrolling, no podcast playing through earbuds, no catching up on social media. Some find it peaceful. Others find it boring. But it's definitely more present. At work, you sit at a desktop computer. It's powerful, fast, efficient, but it's also stationary. When you leave your desk for a meeting, you're disconnected. You take notes with pen and paper. If you need to reference something, you have to remember it or go back to your desk. Photography is deliberate. You carry a camera if you're serious about capturing moments, but most people don't. Life's ephemeral moments go unrecorded more often. Is this a loss? Or is it presence? Both, probably. The evening brings more reading, more television, more traditional media consumption. Entertainment is less personalized, more shared. Families watch the same shows because streaming hasn't fragmented viewing habits to the same degree. Social connection requires more effort. You call friends on the phone, actual voice calls. You make plans in advance because you can't just text, "Where are you?" when you're running late. Relationships require more intentionality, but might be deeper as a result. Chapter 11. The Philosophical Reckoning. As we near the end of this journey down a path not taken, we need to grapple with a difficult question. Which world is better? The honest answer is that neither is purely superior. Each timeline has traded certain goods for others. Our timeline, the one with Apple, gave us unprecedented access, connection, and capability. It put the sum of human knowledge in our pockets. It enabled creativity and entrepreneurship at scales previously impossible. It connected billions of people across geographical and economic divides. But it also gave us addiction, distraction, surveillance, and a fractured attention that struggles to engage deeply with anything. It accelerated inequality in new ways while solving it in others. It created new forms of human connection while diminishing old ones. The alternate timeline we've explored offers presence, privacy, and perhaps more authentic human connection. It moves more slowly, preserves more of traditional culture, maintains clearer boundaries between work and life, public and private. But it also leaves billions disconnected, maintains steeper barriers to opportunity, and forgoes innovations that have genuinely improved lives. It's more stable, but less dynamic, more traditional, but less accessible, more private, but less connected. The real insight isn't that one world is superior, but that both are the results of choices. Choices about what we value, what we're willing to trade, and what kind of relationship we want to have with technology. Apple's philosophy, that technology should serve humans rather than the reverse, that interfaces should be intuitive, that design matters as much as function, didn't just change products, it changed what we thought technology could be. Without that philosophy, technology remained in the realm of the specialist. It was powerful but alien, capable but hostile, advanced but inaccessible. In our timeline, Apple's vision made technology human. Whether that was ultimately good or bad might depend on when you ask the question and what you've lost or gained in the process. Epilogue: the seeds we water. Every system contains the seeds of its own transformation. The question is, which seeds are we watering today? In the timeline we explored, the seed of intuitive, human-centered technology never received the water it needed to grow. Mike Markula invested elsewhere. Steve Jobs became a consultant rather than a visionary CEO. The philosophy that technology should serve humans rather than forcing humans to bend to technological demands remained a marginal idea. The world continued, different but not destroyed. People lived their lives, built their societies, created their art. But they did it in a world where machines remained firmly in the category of tools, useful but foreign, powerful but separate. In our timeline, that seed grew into something enormous. It reshaped economies, transformed communication, redefined what it means to be connected. Whether it grew into a beautiful tree or an invasive weed probably depends on your perspective and your relationship with the technology it created. But here's what both timelines reveal. Nothing was inevitable. The world you live in, the device you're likely holding as you listen to this, the intuitive interface that feels so natural you don't even think about it, all of that hung on small moments, casual suggestions, and people willing to bet on a different vision of what technology could be. History isn't a river flowing inevitably toward a predetermined destination. It's a garden where countless seeds fall and only some take root. Which ones grow depends on the water they receive, the care they're given, and sometimes on a wife's offhand comment on a summer morning in 1976. This has been Paths Not Taken, reminding us that history isn't inevitable, but chosen. The question is, what are we choosing today? And which seeds are we watering now?